So over the past 30 years, a bunch of information has been collected on the distribution and abundance of animals and plants worldwide. And the latest report estimates that we lost around 50% of the diversity we had in the 70s, which means that the current rate of extinction is comparable to a previous rate extinction in ancient times, something that is mainly attributed to humans. So a lot of people are talking right now about the sixth biodiversity crisis. A lot of the problem is linked to having a lot of animals and plants and trying to make decisions that protect them best. Biodiversity is mainly found in places that are relatively remote, underfunded, and where we have little information about the exact distribution and abundance of those plants and animals. Which means that we have to try to manage best our environment to protect biodiversity with very little information. Earth observation is there to help fill this information gap by trying to have information about our environment in places where we simply do not have the human resources and financial support to try to get this information from on the ground. Biodiversity is actually extremely important to our well-being. This is what sustains the delivery of services from nature that we use on a day-to-day basis. Clean water, clean air, food, pollination. And to support this biodiversity and to make sure that we retain it, we need to have information at the global scale about where it is, how it's doing, what's threatening it, and how can we move with effective solution towards retaining this diversity. So when you think about the job of a conservationist, you need to think about three main questions that he or she is trying to answer. First one, what is the state of biodiversity? How much diversity do we have? Where is it found and at which pace is it changing over time? Second axis, need to think about threat. What is threatening biodiversity? Is it just climate change? Is it just deforestation? Do you have interacting threats? And how fast and how strong are these threats affecting biodiversity? The last axis is about understanding the impact of your action. If I put a protected area here, is it actually helping? Do I see a rise in the level of biodiversity in this area over time? Do I stop threat to affect this ecosystem? These are the kind of questions that conservation are really about. So part of my work tend to focus on extremely neglected yet super important ecosystem. And these are desert ecosystem and mangrove ecosystem. So first, why desert? It looks like a very empty environment with very little to worry about. It's actually very wrong. There's a lot of diversity, important diversity, that inhabit desert ecosystem. And this diversity is being lost at incredibly fast rate. In the Sahara, for example, it has been estimated that we lost over 90% of all the megafauna, big animals, large vertebrates, in the last 100 years. One of the threats to desert biodiversity is the activity that is going on in those areas that very few people work in and therefore very little information is available. Another type of work that my team recently done was about trying to help the reintroduction of one of the iconic desert species, the scimitar oryx in Chad. This species used to be found all over the Sahara 100 to 200 years ago. And due to heavy poaching, conflict with livestock, it slowly disappeared and now is only found in captivity. Now there is a project supported by the Zoological Society of London to bring back some of those individuals in a game reserve in Chad. The problem is, last time this species was thriving in that environment was nearly 30 years ago. So to which extent is it a good idea to bring back those individuals in that environment, knowing that climate change is driving a lot of the ecological changes happening in this protected area? So in that case, we use satellite data to look at how the environment has changed over the last 30 years, to see whether it was indeed a good idea to bring back those individuals in that game reserve or whether it was Too much changes for the species to cope on its own. Now, what you need to know about scimitar oryx is that it's a specialist. It has specialized on these areas that sit at the fringe between true desert and the Sahel. And this limits, this fringe has been shrinking over the past 30 years. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't reintroduce the scimitar oryx back in this game reserve. It means that this reintroduction probably needs some special attention to make sure that no level of extra threat could compromise this reintroduction. Another environment where Earth observation could really support the protection of biodiversity are mangroves. What are mangroves? Mangroves are ecosystems that sit between the terrestrial and the marine environment. These are those forests that are submerged for part or all of their life. These are extremely critical environments for many reasons. First, these are ecosystems that provide a lot of services to humanity. They provide protection against hurricane and sea rise. They are also an incredibly important location for fish nursery, so supporting all the fisheries that occur worldwide. Now, these ecosystems are among the most threatened ecosystems on Earth. They are disappearing at an extremely fast rate, mostly because people do not value them and do not see the use of them, despite the fact that they provide so many services. Again, mangroves provide a lot of logistical challenges for conservationists to effectively support their conservation. Very difficult to access. A lot of biodiversity, but very difficult biodiversity to measure and monitor. From an Earth observation point of view, it's actually an interesting system. Even though it's covered by cloud, which reduce the potential usability of optical imagery, technologies such as radar provide a very interesting way of monitoring mangroves in terms of degradation, but also in terms of coastline loss. And one of the work we did recently was to assess changes in one of the, well, basically the largest mangrove ecosystem in the world, which are the Sundarbans. The Sundarbans is this enormous mangrove that sits between Bangladesh and India and has been changing extremely quickly and drastically over the past decades. Yet there is no consistent standardized information about the rate of change at the level of the ecosystem. And so what we did was to look at originally the impact of a hurricane on the Sundarbans. And that led us to look at a coastline change. And what we were able to report was that within 2 years, there's nearly on average 70 to 100 meters of coastline that has been lost in the Sundarbans. So imagine 100 meters of mangrove disappearing in roughly 2 years. So radar data per se won't tell you why we have lost so much of the coastline in such a short time, but we have several indications. We know that sea rise is happening quite quickly in that part of the world. We know that pollution is an important factor driving the functioning of mangrove ecosystem, and then human activities such as degradation, deforestation, but which is more happening nearby the edge of the mangrove. So although it is not a one-off solution that will tell you exactly what's happening and why it's happening, it has allowed us to ring the alarm bell for an ecosystem that the world should very much nurture and protect.